Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you're listening to a weekly podcast about books and life, not necessarily in that order. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show on iTunes, or use our RSS feed with your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. We're also on Twitter, Instagram, and SoundCloud at VMSPod, on Facebook at facebook.com/Virtual Memories Show, on Tumblr at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, where you can just search out Virtual Memories Show and find a whole bunch of past episodes. You can support this podcast and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/VMSPod and set up your level of support. Every week you'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of the show. So visit patreon.com/VMSPod or paypal.me/VMSPod and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. So, over the weekend, my wife asked, "So, where are you going this week?" And it took me a few moments before I realized the answer was nowhere. I just went back looking over my calendar and I realized I haven't had a week without a flight or a train trip since the first week of June. So I'm kind of thankful to be able to take it easy for a little bit. While it's great to be in demand and know that people, need me to show up in places and do my spiel. Nonetheless, it's going to be kind of nice to relax for a week or so. Now, September is going to be kind of hectic. There are 2 pharma conferences, an FDA visit, 2 comics festivals. Possibly, I will be testifying in front of Congress. So, I will take a relatively easy stretch now, I'll tell you. Still, I'll get out and record a couple of podcasts this month, but even on that end, thanks to the big run I did up to Boston for ReaderCon and environs around there back in July, I actually have all of August's episodes already recorded. So I'm feeling pretty good about things. The other thing I'm happy about is professional. The Senate voted last week on the big bill that I worked on in 2015 and 16, and then spent most of 17 lobbying for, and they passed it 94-1. Thank you, Bernie Sanders, for opposing it. And the president sort of threatened to veto it at one point, but his spokesman says he'll sign it. And that means I got something done. And I'll be able to add yet another bizarre item to my resume. I'm not sure if it's going to look weirder than literary cultural podcaster, which, for completeness' sake, I do put on my LinkedIn bio. But it's kind of nice to have something I worked on so darn long. That was the whole reason I quit my job and formed this new gig. To see that actually go to a vote and make it through the whole legislative process is pretty awesome. Anyway, that's just me and the oddball life that I lead. Now, this week's show, weirdly, is actually with a kindred spirit in that respect. Not in the terms of the pharmaceutical stuff, but in terms of balancing a business world, day job, and something really, well, you'll see. The guest is a woman named Patty Farmer, and she has a new book out called Playboy Laughs, the comedy, comedians, and cartoons of Playboy. It just came out from Beaufort Press. It's the second of 3 books about the cultural impact of the Playboy empire, and that's like the magazine, the clubs, the jazz festivals, the TV shows, the early TV shows, not the late-stage E-network reality stuff. Because there's actually a giant impact that Hugh Hefner and that whole empire had, not just in terms of making sex acceptable, but a lot of the music, the comedy, the art, the progressiveness of what the clubs did. Patty captures all of that. And the first book in the trilogy, Playboy Swings, covers the music and musicians that Playboy championed. But this one, Playboy Laughs, most of it covers the comedians who played the Playboy Club circuit, which is at least the way she frames it, the first real chain of clubs around the country and then around the world where comedians and other performers could go on a circuit and play 40, 45 weeks a year and make a decent living. That said, as I started reading it, I realized Patty and I have a lot in common. Namely that we like seeking out and talking to, for lack of a better term, legends. The other term I could use is old-timers, but we'll go with legends. Because Playboy Laughs is filled with interviews with comedians and performers like Shecky Greene and Fred Willard, Larry Storch, Professor Irwin Corey has a huge contribution to make, Norm Crosby, Jackie Gale, and a ton of others. The last third of the book is about cartooning and art in Playboy itself, and that's got some great segments with, well, past guests Jules Feiffer, Arnold Roth, who I'm hoping to record with soon, Doug Snade, who I have a goofy anecdote about during the episode, and there's some great anecdotes about working with Harvey Kurtzman and Will Elder on Little Annie Fanny, and just what Hugh Hefner was like as a cartoon editor on top of all the other responsibilities he had with Playboy. And beyond all that, beyond talking to like the sort of people that I seek out and want to sit down and record with, Patty also talks to like the club managers and the magazine editors. So the book's not just about showbiz, but the biz. And that's even beyond the old timer fetish that we both have. That's part of the kindred spirit thing I'm talking about. That idea of getting at not just the lives of these great old time performers and artists, but the people who worked behind the scenes and made it all happen. And the fact that she was interested in those people just as much as Professor Irwin Corey and Jules Feiffer tells me that we're sort of on the same path, I guess. Except, of course, she was actually able to make this into a coherent, marketable series of books, as opposed to me doing this goofy freeform podcast. But that business sense of hers is also an important part of the conversation and about who she is. And you're going to hear that in a minute. Anyway, Playboy Laughs is a blast. And if you're interested in entertainment and culture in the era of Playboy's heyday, and that's really the 50s, 60s, rolling into the 70s, you're going to love this book. Now here's Patty's bio. Author and historian Patty Farmer is a businesswoman and former model, and is acknowledged as a leading expert on the comedians, music, particularly jazz, entertainment, and entertainers of Playboy. In her current book, Playboy Laughs, she chronicles, through hundreds of personal interviews, the careers and personalities of the country's comic community. Terry Teachout, in a review for the Wall Street Journal, states, quote, Patty Farmer goes a long way toward answering the question of how jazz and Playboy acquired its cultural cachet. Patty's followed the entertainment industry as an avid fan and archivist all her life, and has spent the last decade writing about some of our most significant cultural institutions and personalities. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Patty Farmer. But I should ask the basic question, which I'm sure you've been asked a million bazillion times. We may as well get out of the way early. Your Playboy connection. What prompted Playboy Swings, Playboy Laughs, and the third book? What is your affinity?
I'm an entertainment historian, and I just kept hearing about Playboy. You know, Gil, to tell you the truth, I did not consciously say they were a great entertainment format and go after them. But I kept hearing them, you know, and I've interviewed Patti Page and Leslie Gore and Diane Carroll and Shecky Greene and all these folks. And in their interviews, they'll say, you know, I started out at Playboy. I was doing the Playboy circuit. Or Joan Rivers, you know, telling me, well, you know, when I started in the business, it was at Playboy, and I was part of a trio, you know, and so I kept hearing this, and I'm curious by nature, and I looked into it, and it's a outstanding, you know, venue, entertainment conglomerate, you know, Playboy, worldwide entertainment. The magazine, the TV shows, the jazz festivals, the Playboy clubs, But people haven't really focused on that. You know, you say Playboy, and the first thing people think about are bunnies and centerfolds. Yeah. And there's been nothing written about the great entertainers that started there, that worked there their whole lives, or that got a break there. So, you know, I like to give my readers something new. And this was just, I asked myself, you know, why hasn't anybody else written like this? As you know, it doesn't even fit into one book. You know, I had to break it up into music and comedy and writing. So that was my Playboy connection. And, you know, through it all, Hugh Hefner opened up his archives eventually, not initially, to me. So I did the research, you know, the mortar and building blocks of any history, found the dates and facts and what happened when, but then I did hundreds of interviews and went to the people that were actually there. The headliners, the big names, as well as people you haven't ever heard about, but who Playboy gave a job to. You know, they worked the circuit 50 weeks out of the year, and they got a paycheck doing what they loved.
And I grew up with a European/Israeli father who subscribed to Playboy since I was a little kid, and we lived relatively close enough to Great Gorge, to the resort, that my parents would actually take me there. As a 5 or 6 year old, seeing, you know, the women walking by in the bunny costumes probably warped me in a certain direction at a very young age. But in fact, I asked my mother before we got together here, what she remembers, or who she remembers going to see at the Playboy Club, because I was hoping to be a Steve and Edie story, but unfortunately it was Marilyn McCoo and Billy Davis Jr. was the one show she remembers. No comedy, but at least she saw some music there. My father remembers something very different from the clubs.
I did get to talk to Steven for Playboy Swings, and he remembers it fondly.
Yeah. At what point did it segment into the three major topics for you? The music, the comedy, and then the sort of intellectual or art pursuit?
Yeah, pretty early on, you know, I realized to do it justice, you know, I really just could not cover it in one book. You know, it would be 1,200 pages, and plus my publisher said, you know, I'm not publishing 1,200
That'll
pages.
Do it.
So, and that did it. And it was more organized that way. You know, I talked to the singers, you know, which was the gamut. You know, you mentioned a couple, and there was also like Ike and Tina, but then there was Marlena Dietrich and Mitzi Gaynor, and, you know, on, Frida Payne and Gloria Gaynor. And people always ask me who was my favorite or who performed at the Playboy clubs, whether they were singers or comedians. And I tell them, you know, I'd have an easier time telling you who didn't perform there. Right. And that's really, you had the gamut. You had Jack Jones and Al Jarreau and all these people that did go on to become household names. But as I said before, you have a lot of comedians and singers that really kind of just languished at a certain level and didn't do anything else.
Show business.
Yeah.
You know,
exactly.
It's still work.
It did. And Jerry Van Dyke summed it up for me. He said, Playboy gave us a stage to work out, you know, our timing and what worked with an audience, and just how to perform and how to get better until we could move up to the next level.
Reps are insanely important. It's one of the things I picked up from doing this for 5 years now, because I listen back to the early ones and I'm a disaster. But you realize when you do something with a sense of repetition like that, you start to pick up on those, except for my jokes, which never go anywhere. Nice. That was polite. I appreciate it. What did you get better at in terms of doing these interviews? What did you start to learn to either to avoid or to make sure you could get out of a guest?
Just keeping people kind of on topic.
Yeah.
And again, knowing when to let them run, even if they're going off topic a little bit. It kind of makes me think of what else I can do with the information they're giving me, you know, gives me ideas for another book at that very moment. Like Diane Carroll, you know, if she's going off in a tangent about something else, I always think I can use it down the road.
How long did it take to get Hefner to open up?
I can tell you exactly. I approached them the beginning of the project, and introduced myself, told them what I was doing. And I thought they'd be tickled and delighted and just say, great, what do you want to know? Sit down with Hef anytime you want. But it took about a year. About a year, they were very polite, and they said, well, keep us informed. You know, we had a meeting, invited me to the mansion. I met Dick Rosenzweig, who is really running things over there. And we had lunch. We had private lunch in the dining room. They had a menu printed up for me and everything. And again, they said, you know, just keep us updated, and sent me on my way. One of the happiest moments was about a year later when I picked up the telephone, and it was Steve Martinez. And he said, Mr. Hefner asked me to call you. I am his personal archivist, and you're invited to go through the archives and come work anytime you would like in the archives. And I was like, doing my happy dance, definitely. So it took them in later on, because I've been doing this now for about 4 years with Playboy. They told me that they get almost 100 inquiries a day.
Did you ever find out why they took you seriously?
I kept them up to date. You know,
okay.
It was just a very
you showed
professional,
that persistence? Yeah.
Right. You know, not even a bugging them, just a professional, organized way. I let them know what I was doing, who I was talking to, and you know, who my publisher was, and really that they knew I was serious.
Mm-hmm. So. And have you gotten Hef to sit down to talk?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Because it's not officially, he's not quoted in this one. I wasn't sure
right.
if he's...
You should read Swings.
Okay, he has a source. Yeah. Okay. Because I'd wondered if that's the...
No, I have, and I'm not saying I was ever included in the inner circle, but I'm advanced enough that I get invited for movie nights on occasion. So I've been there for quite a few movie nights and dinner, and, you know, I got to know Keith Hefner quite well before he passed, unfortunately. As we were discussing, that's the perils of the job we have, is making friends.
So far, it has been about 230 episodes with only one death. So I'm feeling pretty good.
How lucky are you?
There are a few who are on death's door, which I feel kind of bad about,
gosh.
but, you know, nothing I can do at this point.
I had the pleasure of interviewing Patty Page for an earlier book. You know, so I do become friends with these great people and keep up the conversation, so to speak. And I take it very hard when I lose them. I've lost Patty, I lost Celeste Holmes, Polly Bergen, Andy Williams, Al Jarreau, you know, all these great performers who, again, just drives home the point of how hard I take my job, or how seriously I take my job, that there's been nothing written about them in Playboy, and them in a lot of other things. You know, in the course of talking about Playboy, of course, we talk about other things. You know, Al Jarreau, how he started out. It was really as part of a duo, Al and Julio. Who knew that? Right. And at Playboy. And Johnny Carson came and saw him, and he became Al Jarreau.
Mm-hmm. Who was your near miss? Who were you hoping to get, but who passed away before you had a chance? Not, you know, like a Richard Pryor, but somebody relatively recent.
There were a few, and you know what? Their names elude me right now.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll suddenly blurt one out in the middle of
that. And it kind of keeps my nose to the grindstone, because
no one's going to be here forever.
Everybody's not Professor Irwin Corey, who hangs around till 102. Which, thank you, I was so happy that he did. He's another one I'd go and visit, because he was so smart. I mean, he was for all his joking and everything. Mm-hmm. I went to see him just a couple months before he passed, and he had read a book on the Catholic Church's participation or collaboration with the Nazis. And, you know, so we had some deep conversations.
And you're just sitting back with, okay, you're again, passing the century mark, and still, you know.
And yet I had to slap his hands. I had to keep telling him, keep your hands to yourself, Irwin.
There's a degree of that, though. That's a, there's a time that, you know, you're not going to redeem certain people into contemporary standards and mores. We'll put it that way.
Right.
Is there someone you're dying to get? Who's a no? Unless you don't want to save for
no, I'm not going to mention anybody.
Tell me off mic, though.
Yeah, I've been really very blessed with being able to get people to talk to me.
Yeah.
And I think it's, as with your job, your reputation. And just like with Playboy, they see you're serious.
There's a cascade effect. Right. And once they hear their peers sat down with you, that really does tend to, oh my God, they talk. I better straighten the story out because they might tell you something.
Wait, Shecky talked to her. I know he's going to slant that story.
That's another one. I remember Mark Maron, the great podcaster, comedian, etc. Apparently he can't get Shecky Green.
Oh.
Shecky will not sit down with him. And I don't know if it's just because he'd prefer being excerpted in text as opposed to being recorded, but for some reason that was one of Maron's great misses, that he can't get Shecky Green.
Oh, see, Shecky and I had no problem at all.
Well, maybe if Mark was a blonde, I'm just kidding. Do you remember your first Playboy? Do you remember seeing it when you were young?
No, it was before my time.
Okay. I remember your first Playboy, just your first one. I mean, the first time you saw
the book, the magazine. Galley, or the magazine.
The magazine.
Oh.
Only because it was in my mother will tell the story that I used to hang centerfolds in my room when I was like 2.5 to 3 years old. So yeah, I was insanely precocious, although at least it set a path, like you said. And that would have been the early 70s, so that would have been a different era. So.
I remember babysitting and seeing them around in bedrooms, which I probably wasn't supposed to be wandering into. But yeah.
Because I wondered if there was a formative moment for you in relation to Playboy, or if
I don't
it was
think girls really, it doesn't hit them. It's like, whatever. I have everything she has. Or, at 12 you really don't, but you don't know that you don't.
Yeah. Someday. Yeah. So tell me about your background as a historian and a writer. Like, where did you come up leading up to this?
My background's really as a businesswoman. Mm-hmm. And then the recession of 2007 hit and things came to a stop. They didn't even slow down. They just stopped. Yeah. And there were no meetings to be had. My life was very busy with business, either talking to partners about doing a deal or working on a condo conversion or doing something. And it just overnight stopped. And I don't do well when I'm bored, and I'm very curious. And I started wandering around the plaza because I thought that was fascinating. It was being promoted a lot because right at that year, 2007, they were celebrating their 100th birthday. And so it was on my mind a lot. And I found out it had a nightclub, and I had never heard of the nightclub before. And I went to the management and asked if I could rummage through their archives. And they looked at me like I had green hair, and they said, "We don't have archives," which for 100-year-old historic building, I found that amazing. And, I said to them, I said, Marilyn Monroe's been here, the Beatles, movies have been made here, and you had this wonderful nightclub. And they said, we also had a lot of owners. Conrad Hilton owned it. When he left, he took what he wanted. Someone else you might be familiar with, Ivana and President Donald Trump owned it at one time, and they walked away with a lot of photos and things that they were entitled to walk away with, but
left an incomplete record.
Exactly. Yeah. So I just started putting together the history, and the more I found, the more I wanted to find. And then after I had the history, like I do with all of my books, I went to the performers, and the first one I went to was Leslie Gore. And I could not find an agent or a contact for her. So I wrote her a letter, a real old-fashioned letter. Mm-hmm. And I was in California, I'll remember this forever, in California on the 405 freeway. And a phone call came in, I picked it up, and they asked for me, and she said, "Hi, I'm Leslie Gore. You sent me a letter. When are you going to be in town? Let's get together for lunch." Because
that's not an easy prank call to make, so you had to take that seriously, I figure.
Exactly. Yeah. I said, "Hum a few bars for me here." No. But, and that really started it. Mm-hmm. And I enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed hearing from the performers what it was like, and I found out my readers like that oral history. Of course, I could tell them that exact same story and say, what I learned from Leslie was X, Y, and Z. She was 16 years old and blah, blah, blah. But I think they enjoy hearing it in her words. So I include all the oral histories that I can.
So I guess my meta question is then, where did that archiving impulse begin for you? That need to search for this stuff? Have you found this is why I like to look into the roots of things?
That's just my warped little brain. I'm a creative wannabe, and
this is easier than actually writing. I always tell people I'm a failure as a writer, but I get to do this and make art out of it. So
I can write too. So, my talents are really in the business sector, but I took those talents, organization, and cognitive thinking, and just applied it to what I wanted to do. I want to be up there on stage. I want to be the singer, but I know I can't. So it's the next best thing. And I was born out of my era. And in my household, we didn't watch TV a lot, but my mother watched it when, nobody else was around. So I watched her TV shows, The Thin Man and Humphrey Bogart and Sabrina and all these wonderful movies that I thought was what life was like. I thought, I'd grow up and wear a beautiful gown every night and get my hair coiffed and go to a lovely supper club and
solve murders and things.
Right, exactly. And see Marge Champion and Gower, dance around. And it wasn't like that. But so the next best thing is sitting down with Marge and having her tell me what it was like.
Where'd you grow up?
Pennsylvania. Okay. I was born in Pennsylvania, grew up in New Jersey.
Okay, rural or close to city?
Allentown.
Okay.
Allentown.
So right
it was, at that time it was rural.
Yeah.
And then New Jersey was the burbs to that.
Yeah. I'm 25 miles from here in the city, but only 25 miles away, but wooded, deer, bear, wild turkey, and all that stuff. So,
which is a nice balance, isn't it?
You can see the skyline from my town. You can get to this little mountain, you see the entire New York City thing, and it's there. I can get there if I need to, but, nice and quiet. So I have to strike that sort of balance. And now you split your time among...
California and New York.
Okay.
Overseas.
Understood. Because, I still live in the house I grew up in. So, I never really escaped. Yeah, see, people always put that face. I'm like, really? You never left?
No, it was kind of a wonder, wow.
It's America. Everybody's mobile except me. I do this instead so I can step into another world for a minute and then not have to commit. There's a long, deep-rooted psychological thing about this, I'm sure. But, but to get to the joke I say about, being a failed writer and therefore, I get to make something like this. The second half of the book, of the new book, Playboy Laughs, where you interview the cartoonists that Playboy published, it would seem that Hefner had the same thing, that he couldn't quite make it as a cartoonist, but he was the greatest cartoon editor around.
In his mind, anyway.
Yeah, well.
He... As you just said, he wanted to be a cartoonist before he ever thought about publishing a men's magazine. He thought he'd make a living drawing cartoons. And from the time he was a young boy, he used to even journal, with cartoons of himself. He nicknamed himself Hep Hef, and he was this cool swinging, kid. And he... 1951 actually published a comic book, or he didn't publish, but it was published, 74-page comic book about Chicago. And I've seen it. I actually own a copy. He was good. He just wasn't good enough to compete with the other great cartoonists of the day. You
had guys like Harvey Kurtzman like that out there, who he eventually became the boss of. But
right, Jack Cole and Shel Silverstein and all these people. And I think that was one of Hefner's genius things that he did, was always getting the very best people in everything, in entertainment, in management, in editing, in cartooning. I mean, he went directly to the top. Yeah. And what does he have to lose? They could say no, but nobody said no. I mean, it was Playboy. It was cool. It was hip. It was sophisticated. Even Ian Fleming became a buddy of his and wrote for the magazine. and had James Bond in Diamonds Are Forever. At one scene, he opens his wallet, and next to his license to kill is his Playboy Club card, right on the screen. You should watch the scene, get the clip. But that's what Playboy was. It was cool and it was hip, and cartooning was a big part of it.
Mm-hmm. And did you seem to have have the New Yorker and a couple of other models in mind as far as that went?
Well, Esquire. He worked for Esquire and left Esquire, and that was kind of the catalyst to publishing his own magazine. Mm-hmm. So it was the Esquire and New Yorker as examples. He wanted better. He loved comics, he loved comic books, but he wanted better paper and high-class comics.
Mm-hmm. And you get the Gay and Wilsons and all those guys. Again, these are all the things I grew up on. I mean, the Naked Girls are one thing when I was a little kid, but okay, that bent me in one direction. All the comics and such, warped me in that side also. So, I guess I have a lot of things I have to blame or credit Hugh Hefner for. Yeah, I'll just be on the sofa. You can talk to me in 50 minutes and because we're in that I would say the Upper West Side, but Central Park South milieu.
There you go. But I mean, people like Doug Sneed and Jules Pfeiffer. I mean, these were all great guys, talented men, and anytime they could get into Playboy magazine, they worked it.
I met Doug at the Toronto Comic Arts Festival a couple of years ago, so I was gratified when I read your anecdote with him from a few years earlier at TCAF, as it's known, because he also drew my wife in the copy of his book that we got and made her a bit more endowed than in real life. But yeah, I also told her that, be thankful because he could otherwise refer you to Hugh Hefner and get you into Playboy, as it's a really fun book, especially the cartooning anecdotes, everyone. But yeah, it's the Doug Sneed story. I was just dying because he described, this is a man in his mid-80s?
I would say, yeah.
Describing, going to Alabama with his lady friend for the season. Yeah, and just lady friend. Okay, you're of a different world.
But great, I love the cartoons. And someone actually disagreed with me, and many people often do, and said they didn't see why I included cartoons.
I wondered about the decision, but go on. Yeah.
But, it was just another form of comedy, I thought.
That's what I was going to ask, because they're separate segments, but pairing them, it would seem thematically, you can do that. Stand-up comics are going to be a very different interview than a cartoonist will, and I'm sure that's
absolutely, absolutely. And no matter how old they are, and we did talk about age, and they're all of an age now, luckily, if you get to talk to them. And they're still cracking jokes. Yeah. You talk to Larry Storch, and he's just
their lives are spent with shtick.
Yes, it's hysterical.
Now, which side was tougher to get access to, the comedians or the cartoonists?
I did not find, only not so much that I had got rejected, but I could not find as many cartoonists.
I kind of figured it's a different pool, and
there weren't as many.
Yeah.
And, we lost a lot.
Right.
So I did try and profile those that I couldn't talk to directly, but...
Yeah, it's tougher.
Yeah.
And within the cartooning world, trust me, there is a huge... Well, actually, maybe it's small. The people who said they'll take Little Annie Fanny because at least it was some Kurtzman and Elder, versus others who feel like, no, this is a complete travesty. They should have been doing their own work and making great art. I fall on those were the comics I was reading as a little kid that, got me going in a certain direction. But yeah, it's one of those toughies as to, could they have done something better if they weren't working for Playboy? But on the other hand, would they have done anything that graphically gorgeous?
Right, exactly. And it gave them the opportunity to be a little bit more creative with a different subject. Mad Magazine and Playboy are, two different subjects, I guess, even though they're different.
They're different genres,
right? Exactly,
of humor. So, yeah. Can you talk a bit about what you've learned about the impact of Playboy, not in the immediate, sense of giving comedians and cartoonists and these performers work, but the greater cultural impact
I think
the magazine and the Empire has had?
It really impacted the culture dramatically. We were at a turning point in our society, 1960. You have a litany of things that were going on, the Vietnam War, the women's movement, the gay movement, on and on, the black movement, and Playboy championed, all these causes. I'm sure you and everyone else knows that Hugh Hefner is a great campaigner for First Amendment rights, and Playboy put their money where their mouth was, or put their mouth where their money was. I don't know how that goes. Yeah. But, when it was unpopular, Hefner wrote about women's right to choose and wrote about the birth control pill, how it should be legalized. At one time it wasn't. Broke the color barriers on stage. We were actually operating under segregation rules. This is pre-1964. And he integrated his TV shows and his clubs, and always to consequences. And I think he was genuinely surprised every time there was a consequence to pay. If it was TV show and he had Nat King Cole on talking to a white woman, and sponsors and networks threatened to cancel and pull out advertising, he said, let them do what they need to do, and I'll do what I need to do. It was never something that Hef said, let's do it, even though I believe in it, let's do it, and we'll play it up and get all the publicity we can. Yeah. He always just did it, and there were consequences to pay, whether it was, like I said, integrating the TV shows. He also integrated the audience as well as the stage for the jazz festivals. He championed First Amendment rights again with Lenny Bruce and George Carlin, even though he wouldn't let them at his club eventually. He gave them a forum. Yeah. And when George moved up to the 7 words you can't say on TV, Hef gave him a giant hug and said, man, I'll love you forever. We're going to be buddies forever, but you can't play at my clubs anymore. Because, if it was Great Gorge or Lake Geneva, they were family resorts. And if they were the Playboy clubs, he wanted people to be able to bring their wives, and you couldn't be too blue, which is funny for Playboy. A lot of people don't understand that.
Funniest discovery? Funniest person you did not expect you were going to be interviewing?
I found that the female comedians I was really surprised by. And Hef gave Phyllis Diller a forum, these groundbreaking female comedians that were coming up that didn't have that big an audience. So, Phyllis Diller, Joan Rivers, Lily Tomlin, Kay Ballard, all these great gals that, again, just like everybody else, they were able to ply their craft.
And I think you had the story in the book with Phyllis Diller that apparently they tried doing a Sexy Women of Comedy.
Right.
Or, a parody thereof, and realized Phyllis Diller actually
was really pretty. She was too pretty to parody,
That's a fact. My Cloris Leachman begins with the Mel Brooks version, which is, this harsher, high anxiety thing. And looking back, I'm like, oh, she was something.
She was a dish.
Yeah. And it's just, catching them at a weird time. Once again, in my single digit years, it's a strange childhood, I tell you.
I have to tell you, after giving it a lot of thought and talking to a lot of people, I think Playboy Penthouse, the TV show, I have come to the conclusion that was the first TV reality show. Mm-hmm. Because Hefner wanted to have people believe they were in his living room. When the network came to him and said, how about a TV show? I'm sure they thought it was going to be along the lines of Ed Sullivan,
variety
where it would be in the
sort of
studio and people would come out and sing or dance or tell a joke and sit on the couch and maybe chat. And Hef said, I want it to be kind of like the salons of old days, where I have a group of friends and, Sammy, can we get you up to sing a song? Or, Rich, what's going on in your life? Rich Little, tell a joke. Or, Lenny Bruce, these were just iconic TV shows,
Yeah. How do you think the reality show of the later days of Playboy played out?
After Dark?
No, I mean like the 2000s, how it all evolves into being part of like the E-network sort of fare. Because that's a very different...
Yeah.
It becomes self-parody.
Right. And it's just really...
At least you hope it was self-parody, but yeah.
I think it just kind of got blended into the other things that everybody was doing for shock value. You have the Kardashians and, this week they're doing something outrageous. You have to be more outrageous. And you have the girls next door. And, I can't even keep up with what the later ones were. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if they were supposed to be funny. I think they were supposed to be more like, I don't know what, reality. But
that's what I wonder what the intent
Hugh
was.
Hefner in his pajamas with these, 20-something-year-olds, even though he's married to a 30-year-old. I don't, it's
closer to age appropriate. Yeah.
Yeah, only 60 years difference. But
that's But yeah, I'd wondered in terms of the impact on the culture overall, and then seeing the culture catch up and exceed. Right.
Actually, I think one of the big cultural influences Playboy had, and it's almost too obvious to mention, but he made sex acceptable. Good girls did was, one of their slogans. And that's the girls that he had as centerfolds. Even if they had to make up a story where, she was a secretary or school teacher or, babysitter or whatever. He never had the strippers and the pole dancers as centerfolds. It was, that's what he was selling. He made sex almost wholesome, heaven forbid.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I was wondering in terms of the cultural impact. I used to... Howard Stern was my marker, I guess, along those lines. I first heard him when I was 12 years old. Again, weirdly formative experience. But looking back decades later, you realize, those are things that people simply weren't talking about prior. You couldn't do that on the air before this. But what your book really brought out to me was that realization of, there are many aspects of the culture that Hugh Hefner and Playboy laid out before Howard Stern gets there, that we don't quite realize before him and before that magazine didn't exist.
Right. And he made, here we are talking about sex, quite a few decades later, but even so, casually. And back in the 60s, people didn't even talk about it, and to suggest that it was okay to have sex before you were married and, have a magazine that told men how to behave, how to be suave and sophisticated, not just how to get laid, the whole experience, the records and, the bar setup and fine china and a good meal, a nice movie and, just instructions. It was a Bible of sorts.
Yeah. It makes,
for a lifestyle.
Yeah, it puts me in mind of when I was doing my Bruce J. Friedman episode a few years ago. He used to be an editor a few tiers below at the men's magazines, the True Confession type things, and Weasels Ripped My Flesh, the sort of manly action things, and you could see the aspiration they had to we're not going to be Playboy or Esquire, but we can be the working guys version of this. But it's a very different world, I guess, in that respect.
And made it cool.
Yeah.
Dick Gregory told me you took any opportunity you had to flash that Playboy key. You went to pick up your dry cleaning and, you flipped out a card and you go, oh, that's my Playboy Club card. I didn't mean to give that to you. I'm so sorry. I'm embarrassed. But it was cool. It was sophisticated. It was new.
Mm-hmm. Is there an era you wish you'd lived in?
50s.
Okay. I just want to make sure it was like that particular one versus,
parts of it. I'm such an independent woman, but I love the clothes and the styling and the manners. We have no manners. Nobody's even taught manners nowadays, so it's not even a conscious decision not to open that door. Nobody knows that they should.
Mm-hmm. Were you a Mad Men fan, by the way, or not?
Yes.
Okay.
I enjoyed it. I really did.
I assumed, but, I figured later era, but still.
They also mentioned Playboy.
True. And there's Lane has the girlfriend in the Playboy
Right.
Club, and which was integrated also, which brings us all full circle. How tough was the research, by the way? In terms of the archives, was it organized in a way you could work in, or was there there's a very different organizing principle than I would do if I was doing this?
No, it was very organized. Yeah. And I have to tell you, Hugh Hefner put me, as far as archives, in the mind of Barbra Streisand. Because from the time they were both young, they both knew they were going to be stars. And whereas Barbra Streisand, I have people in the industry that were friends with the family, and they tell me they would go to backyard barbecues and they'd be swimming, and you would have this little brownie camera taking pictures of everybody. And Barbara at 12 would say, I'm going to be famous. You can't take a picture of me because I don't want any bad pictures circulating. And Hugh Hefner saved every single thing from forever. Every single piece of paper, because he knew he was going to be an important man and people would want to pour through these archives. So that was what made it hard. It was organized, but there was so much information. I mean, it's a room as big as this room, crammed. Very organized, all in binders. Personal archivist keeps it up to date because even as we speak, he's probably in today's mail getting more articles written or interviews or what have you. But it was a lot to pour through.
The biggest thing that made you just plots in the archives? The holy crap moment?
There was everything. There were a lot of, holy-ass moments because there was nothing... I don't know. I think if it was my life, I would have edited, the worms out of there. But everything was included, and...
Again, being willing to put it all out there instead of trying to be this puritanical, no, I didn't say this or this.
Right. Or there wasn't ever a picture of that, but there is a picture of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What in his upbringing do you think accounts for the phenomenon, I guess, the becoming the person he became?
Well, Hef will tell you that it was his parents. They were very strict, and he said he always felt loved, but was never shown. His parents never hugged him, never kissed him, never said, I love you. It was never that touchy-feely thing. So both he and Keith, who were very close in age and were best friends. Keith passed away, I think, last year. They wanted something. They wanted that warmth, and that just kind of turned him towards, loving relationships and girls. Somehow it turned it that way. And he is a genius. He's a certifiable genius. And he just really funneled that into his pleasures. And the things he liked. And he was lucky. Not lucky, luck is really taking advantage of opportunities. Yeah. But that was his early upbringing, was very regimented and strict. And he went the opposite way. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom.
And did he have a sort of... template, I guess, a person, again, the way you talk about watching The Thin Man when you were young, were there someday I'm going to be that guy in the pajamas and dressing gown?
He also loved old movies.
Okay, because then he had the Chaplin thing you bring up.
Right. Yeah. He is, to this day, he still loves the old movies. I was over at the house, and now it's old movies, but Chinatown we saw, and there's a Humphrey Bogart movie one night, and the other ones were more modern. But he loves old movies, and that's what he romanticized. He's a very romantic person, and he romanticized what he wanted his life to be. It's
when I sat down with Jules Feiffer, and he had the thank God for TCM. He's like, Turner Classic Movies has saved me. I can just sit back and watch, my youth in these movies again and again. And
I'm sure Jules told you that he got his idea for Carnal Knowledge from hanging around the Chicago Playboy Mansion.
Yeah. I have a story about that movie. I was in high school, and we had a substitute teacher for social studies or civics or whatever it was. And we were supposed to watch All the President's Men. And for some reason, the videotape, which is labeled All the President's Men, was Carnal Knowledge. And the intro is just a voiceover of Garfunkel and Nicholson comparing women. The substitute had no idea because she just took the videotape that was labeled All the President's Men. I was the only guy who could reference that movie and knew that I saw this a couple of years ago, and I don't think this is the movie we're supposed to be watching, but I'm not going to say a word. I'm 17.
So did you watch the whole thing?
No, she eventually figured out when it really got to graphic descriptions of the women they were talking about that, I don't think this is what we're supposed to be doing. So, yeah, kids, just do your thing for the rest of the period.
Funny.
Yeah, it was, and again, didn't mislabel it, or I didn't do it, but clearly our social studies teacher had accidentally taped over with.
Or maybe not accidentally.
It's a great movie. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, it's.
And that's how talented these guys were. You know, Jules Pfeiffer has won awards, national awards for his animation, his movies, his writings, and, he has carnal knowledge. I did not know that going into this project.
Just that it was something that spun out of time with Hef, What do you see as the future for the magazine, for the legacy that Hefner has? How do you see it?
I think the magazine is trying to find its viability. They've been trying different formats. Believe it or not, I'm sure you're aware they did away with the nudes last year. What they were thinking there, nobody knows, because I've spoken to, the Hefners, the people at Playboy, and they're
usually a consultant who comes in and, you know what you need to do. Change the whole conversation, and they make their money, and
may as well change the name then. Because
trying to make it a lifestyle magazine.
And it's they saw the error of their ways, and their nudes back in it again is centerfolds. But they also took out the cartoons. That is restructured. There are some cartoons, but none of the old iconic cartoonists have been allowed to submit. They have these young guys, which I think that's what they're trying to. You have to appeal to the young to keep relevant, but it's not a topic that the young can live it. They can. They can't relate to Playboy, I don't think. As far the clubs are closed, TV shows are gone. I don't know.
It was an empire. It had its time.
Yeah, and it was brilliant in its day. I mentioned Hefner is a genius, and I was interviewed for one of the business magazines, and we were talking about Hefner and how I thought he was a brilliant businessman. They thought that was a funny concept, and they wanted to interview me on it. And I said, well, before, again, President Donald Trump, but before Trump ever thought about slapping his name on a building, Hefner came up with branding and perfected branding. I mean, he changed the definition in the dictionary. You hear the name Playboy, it has a totally different meaning now. He was franchised before it was an acceptable business practice. He cross-marketed. He had a circuit. Before that, there was never one club or even one restaurant that was replicated over and over and over again in all the major and some of the minor cities and internationally. So Hefner was really brilliant in doing these things, but I don't see that much of a future. I don't see, once Hef's gone, the mansion's been sold. I don't see really where it will go.
You think largely a casualty of being able to find naked girls on the internet?
I do.
I mean, I know the clubs, I think that was a structural change with entertainment overall, but,
Right, and they've tried new management, a couple of new presidents, and they've gone into porn on TV, trying to, keep the brand alive that way, kind of an updated Playboy. They have that. Licensing, I think that's their biggest asset right now.
It can really be a race to the bottom.
Right. But Asia loves the license, and they sell it for a very high premium. Playboy does. Yeah. So that may be where the business, everything that was brick and mortar and clubs that you went into and saw people like Ursula Andress and all these fabulous celebrities may be reduced to,
the Playboy Casino in Macau.
And they're not even really catching on. Yeah. They try and they're viable for a couple of years. And although they're trying again in New York. I hear we're opening one here.
I remember seeing something about Great Gorge still exists. They're still trying to figure out, I think, who owns the property out there. And I have friends who live nearby in Vernon. So, trying to make something out of that resort. But
I think you can't do it straight. It has to be like a nostalgic club, almost that you go there for retro. You don't go there,
earnestly.
Exactly.
Because there's too much tourism opportunity otherwise, I guess.
I was in Cuba and went to the Tropicana.
What took you there?
Just
wanted to see it?
Interest and seeing what it was like. I have an inquisitive mind.
I'm picking up on that. So So what did you see at the Tropicana? Just the retro?
It was all retro, and that's how they sold it.
Yeah, except they couldn't afford to modernize.
Well, they can with the prices they charge. Cuba charges a huge amount of money for visitors. Usually they're American and we pay it.
Right. Never been. Do you wish you'd gone into writing earlier?
No.
Okay.
There's no money.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm down with that. But do you wish you'd had, just years earlier that you'd gotten into that? Okay.
No, everything in its time, I think.
Yeah.
I modeled to get through school, and then I was able to put business practices into practice. And that's what I really like. I like business. I like controlling it and being right, coming up with an idea and being able to implement it and saying, yes, it works, or on occasion it doesn't, but
fail fast.
That's And writing is a passion. Mm-hmm. So I'm one of those lucky people that I can indulge my passion. Entertainment history it's fading. And I was interviewed, a funny story, we talked about Andy Williams, and I was being interviewed, and they asked me, why I write. And I say, because people are leaving us and taking their stories with them. The libraries are closing. The library of Andy Williams is gone. Mm-hmm. And I said, I was the last interview that Andy Williams gave. And the gal that was interviewing me looked at me very quizzically and said, no, I don't know who he is.
Yeah, I get that with younger artists, and it's still pissing me off. Thomas Dolby, musician from the 80s who I adored. And I've met two people under 30 who I have no idea who that. I'm like, you sons of bitches. Yeah.
Which is why
time
I
erases
write.
all
and
this
that's,
stuff.
why I write. I'm at a stage, I grew up knowing a lot of people who became celebrities. So it's not to hang around with celebrities. If I wanted to do that, I could, call Lainey Kazan any day of the week and we could go out. And
dare I ask, what was how were you connected to Lainey? Just because my wife is an idol. She's my wife's.
I met her and we just clicked and became fast friends. Mm-hmm. The tragedy is she's still so busy and I'm so busy that we, schedule dinners and get-togethers and girl time way far ahead. But that's sacrosanct and we never give that up.
Good. I'm down. Yeah, nice anecdote with her in the book. So I figured you had some.
Yeah. Playboy Swings, I wrote a lot about her too.
Yeah, because she used to manage, which of the L.A.?
New York.
Was it New York?
New York and L.A.
Okay.
Yeah. It began with L.A.
Yeah, it sounded like she took over the L.A. one and then
right, prior to getting into acting.
Yeah. Which, turned out okay.
Yeah, exactly. Turned out really good.
Had you thought of acting yourself or no?
No.
Okay.
No. I'm the geek that likes to be in the background. I'm really shaking in my boots sitting here talking to you, Gil.
I only intimidate people because we're both naked right now. And nobody. I'm just kidding. We're not actually. Now, tell me about the other books that you've done. You have one on the Plaza that, as you said, you also worked. You had a previous book.
Right. I wrote about the Persian Room, which was the nightclub in the Plaza, and that was great fun. Got to talk to a lot of dead people now, but Polly Bergen, Diane Carroll, Andy Williams, Jack Jones, a lot of Leslie Uggams, a lot of great performers who sat down. We went to lunch. We became friends, and they told me their stories. So I wrote about that. I wrote about Playboy music, Playboy comedy. I have the photo album coming out about the Plaza and the movies that were made there. Again, going back to the movies, and it was really the go-to place for directors and producers who could film anywhere. Alfred Hitchcock had carte blanche, and he put North by Northwest in the Plaza. Has Cary Grant looking so dashing and debonair, and you asked me why I'm not living in the 50s. I could get Cary.
And Martin Landau, just
Yes.
as like a side
Yes.
villain in the movie. Looking like I was meeting with my in my day job. I know, and that was the third guy who came up in this conversation. We were having lunch in the steak room and scotch sort of world down in Washington for my day job, and my lead lobbyist guy that I work with down there. We bond over a lot of non-work related stuff. So he immediately asked me top 3 Hitchcock movies. I'm not a huge Hitchcock fan, but the first thing I said, it's got to be North by Northwest. It's like, thank you. Okay, that's good. So, we had another moment of connecting with, every guy my size, shape, et cetera, has the Cary Grant, model is. Yeah, I could never look that good. That's that easy.
Either that or you go, yeah, I look that good.
Yeah. We always pretend. Well, the other line I told him, when I binged through Mad Men, I had the, January Jones really has that Grace Kelly thing. And then Rear Window was on TCM a couple of weeks ago. And I realized, no, she didn't have anything remotely.
No.
Yeah.
Wasn't she fabulous? Best Grace Kelly.
Yeah.
What was it? High Society or?
I'm a Rear Window guy as those things go. But yeah, it's a big Hitchcock night tonight on TCM, by the way. And, you listeners won't get this, but it's North by Northwest, Vertigo, Psycho, and The Birds all tonight. So if you're sitting around bored because there's nothing to do here in New York.
Heavens, no. Summer night, no. But I asked Neil Simon, why did you name it the Plaza Suites? Why was it not the Waldorf Suites or the Ritz Suites? New York, if it had to be a New York hotel, has its share of iconic. And he just looked at me and said, I never thought of it being any other name. Yeah. And that kind of really says it all.
Mm-hmm. Last question, the next book.
I'm still in Playboy.
Yeah, the third Playboy book.
So it's going to be about the writers, the short stories and the editorials and the interviews. All of it was, again, great writing, great ideas by Hef. He had the interviews conducted by...
Was he the guy who came up with the interviewer for the Klansman?
Yes,
okay.
Alex Haley.
Yeah, because the Klansman didn't want one of those Jew writers coming,
and
so he sent
Jew,
Alex Haley instead. As a Jew writer, I can get away with that.
But wasn't that brilliant? And he always had, great writers interview great artists. So I think that's rounds out Playboy. And then I have a lot of other things noodling around in my head. A lot of iconic nightclubs I want to explore, the Copacabana and any place that had girls wearing fruit on their heads, and great comedy and great singers and people like Frank Sinatra, Bobby Rydell, all these great people there.
New York or LA for you? And I know both cities have changed. One's a city, the other's
You're asking
LA,
me to pick among the kids. California has the beach, and I can put on my sweats and go to work out at 5 o'clock in the morning and still have them on at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and nobody looks at me funny. But
They're all looking at you funny, you know.
I know, I don't blame them either. But I think I appreciate each one because I know I can leave. You know, I get the hurly-burly of New York and staying up till 2 o'clock in the morning and, you know, just seeing every cultural event going on and every great jazz club and Broadway show, and then knowing I think I need a couple weeks in California and just take my poodles and run on the beach.
I was wondering, because on your website it did mention Marina and Sabrina?
Yes.
And I wasn't sure if they were going to be cats or poodles.
Poodles.
And, okay.
Poodles, yes.
Because the cats thing would have concerned me. Allergies, et cetera. I figured if they were around here, it would have been rough.
No. And they had to be smart. So, you know, there you go with the poodles.
I'm with you.
They're the most brilliant. They're my babies.
Oh. Patty, thanks so much for coming on the Virtual Memories Show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. You know, anytime I get an opportunity to talk to a like-minded person, you just have to hit me on the head and tell me to shut up.
And that was Patty Farmer. Her brand new book is Playboy Laughs, the comedy, comedians, and cartoons of Playboy from Beaufort Press. It's got a ton of fun stories, and they do sneak out past the Playboy halo into the broader history of showbiz. So even if you're not specifically Playboy interested, you're going to find a lot of neat stories there. I want to check out her previous book, Playboy Swings, sometime, and I'm looking forward to the concluding book about the writers and interviewers at the magazine, because I'm a literary snob, as you guys know. And when we got together, also, I checked out her other new book, Starring the Plaza, which is coming out later this month and looks like a hoot. Now, you can find out more about Playboy Laughs and all of Patty's work at patty-farmer.com. That's patty-farmer.com. She's also on Twitter at patty@theplaza. Now, once we wrapped up the main session, I asked Patty, so, who are you reading? If you want to hear her answer to that, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories Show so you can get access to our quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. Just posted one a few weeks ago with last quarter's guests, and it is wonderful. You can get access by supporting the show at patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. I've got all sorts of goals and goodies in place for patrons, including that podcast, patron-only blog, handwritten show notes for every episode, the series of ebooks that maybe I'll get around to launching this month since I finally have a little bit of time not to be running around, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. Now, this episode was recorded in New York City, so I had to toll at the GW, parked at my favorite garage. Actually, I didn't get to park at my favorite garage. They were filled. So I parked at a different one on 94th Street that gouged the hell out of me. And then the subway down and back. So $60, $70 or so to do this one. All worth it. Yeah, which I'm sure you can tell given the conversation. Still, if you want to help defray some of the costs of the Virtual Memories Show, like web hosting, travel, and equipment, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. Make a one-time or recurring donation. A special thanks go out to Kevin Katila, John Wendler, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Stephen Nadler, Wallace Wilde Minozzi, Andrew Mason, Greg Tanner, Garrett Zecker, Craig P. Steffen, Jack Lescamella, and Ron Slate for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories Show. We've got the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Now, our music for this episode is Nothing's Gonna Bring Me Down by David Bayerwald, used with permission from the artist. In recent months, I've been saying that David is working on a reunion project with his great 80s band, David and David, who made the wonderful album Welcome to the Boomtown. I just figured out by going on Facebook that is not happening. But anyway, David and David are still friends. They're just not going to record a new album together. Still, go check out David Bayerwald's work, both solo and with David and David, because he's one of my favorite musicians. And we did a great episode together about 3 or 4 years ago. And that is it for this week's Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with the great literary critic and Luddite, Sven Burkert. Till next time, You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store or at soundcloud.com/VMSpod. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSpod, on Facebook at facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and review for us. That'll help build a bigger audience. Till next time, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you are awesome. Keep it that way.